I hear that you are the first marine biologist to consider history.
Well, that's. I don't think this is the case. Anything you want to do in marine biology or in biological science is inherently historical, and because of evolution. And I think that lots of people have thought about also history in a narrow sense of what mm, Aristotle or other grand researchers of the past have done. And so they are, for example, the biologist Thomson had written about about Aristotle's writing, and I have a little French book about a French biologist who studied Plinius' writing in a Roman author. So I'm not the first marine biologist to look at history, but I have done it throughout my career and consistently, and therefore I'm a little bit associated with this idea more. Yeah.
But it sort of seems like the other biologists were looking at the oceans in a different way before you. Like you were bringing
Yeah, there is
a new flavor of metrics to the table.
yeah, this is true. There are many ecologists want to who wanted, especially in the 80s and 70s and 80s to 90s, who wanted to make their discipline, ecology, marine ecology, more resembling physics more. And physics is characterized by having no real temporal dimension. Lots of physical process work backward in time. Uh,
Like
and
they're reversible on like the
they
processes are reversible.
Yes, right. And there are lots of models in ecology where the process are supposed to be reversible. For example, um, if you overfished a stock, you reduce it. If you fish less, it's supposed to bounce back. Now, this is roughly correct, but but not really, because if you in a process of fishing too hard, if you change the genetic composition of the stocks, it takes a very long time for certain alleles to show up again, or in the same proportion, or a um, certain part of the ecosystem need very long to recover. For example, a coral reef, if you blast it away, it takes 100, if not thousand, of years to recover, and so you don't have. Whereas the fish can recover very fast, so you don't have this time symmetry, and it was illusory to make um, fishery science and much of ecology to try to make it um, more physical, or attempts to make it look like it's physics. And I think this is a passing fashion. And since the transition to the first century, to the 21st century, this is largely overcome. Um, and and several papers, of which mine on anecdote and shifting baseline, have contributed to realizing the need to explicitly to consider history explicitly, and a subdiscipline or has emerged. It's called historical marine ecology, that largely goes back to such thoughts, and maybe this paper of mine contributed to it. There are other papers of uh, that contributed to it, notably a paper by Jeremy Jackson in Science that showed the effect of overfishing, historically overfishing for hundreds of years, still still impacting us. Yeah.
So how do you know that a historical account is accurate?
Well, we know the converse. For example, if you the study of cod in New England, it was cod in New England was extremely important at the beginning of the settlements there from Europeans, just like they're crucial for Canada. And cod was exploited very strongly by boats based in Boston. They came all the way to Canada, and in fact, the Mi'kmaq language called for American, it's Boston, and so very important. And yet, when you do so-called stock assessment, how many cod are left in the sea, how much cod is left in the sea, people working on this now, they will go back 20 years, 30 years, and assess how much fish is in the sea, how much should be left by the fleet that operate now, and so on. Yet a colleague of mine, his name was Andrew Rosenberg, about 15 years ago, published an estimate of the biomass, of the amount of cod that was there in around New England, and it was exploding the graph, where the biomass trend now was in the lower right corner. The estimate from before was in the upper left corner, and the transition is lost in time because people don't reconstruct the data, and any statement about the proper level of cod is completely erroneous if it doesn't take account of what was there before. We have similarly a paper in review right now, where we analyze 500 years of cod data from Canada, of cod catches, and for 4 centuries, cod yielded about 150 to 200,000 tons per year of fish, of good food, and of fish. And since 1950, with the trawlers have been brought into the picture, and a new method of fishing, and they have massacred the stock, and the catch rose all the way to 700,000 tons per year, 800,000, but then collapsed. Then this led to the collapse in the 80s with Canada, then banning foreign fleet, and then finishing off the cod in 92, the fishery was closed. And I was, at the time, I was a student in Germany, and I was on a German research vessel in 73, in Labrador and Newfoundland, and we fished. It was an enormous German vessel. We fished enormous quantities of fish, and we were measuring the fish and so on. But it's quite clear to me now, in retrospect, that the scientists that were on board and were showing us what to do, they didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't know what the impact of these methods were. And so the stocks now has moved from millions of tons to about 10,000, 12,000 tons that can be caught. And they still want to fish it, and they still maintain it at such low level. And if you don't know that you had millions of tons before that you could exploit and maintain 200,000 tons per year, now if you don't know it, you mislead yourself and the public in that you have a sustainable fishery that produces 10,000 tons per year.
So, what are the dangers of losing all these fish? Is it just that your species is going to starve from not eating, or are there more wide-ranging dangers?
So, what are the danger from losing a fish? The danger is that you lose the fish, and that means that you lose a resource. You lose also a component of an ecosystem that is extremely productive, and so you render the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem of your coast, you render it unproductive, and so instead of operating in bounty, we operate in misery, and the modification of habitat by humans is a well-known thing. For example, if you look at pictures from Iraq, for example, on TV, and people fight, the background is always desertic. It's all sand. There is no tree, no green, no nothing. But if you flash back to 2,000, 3,000 years ago, this is where massive civilization emerged that were based on the farming of wheat. And that was the entire Mesopotamia region was a breadbasket. Then irrigation caused salinization, and they had to shift over to barley, which is more salt tolerant, and then nothing grew, and the soil was destroyed. And now we have massive desertic area in an area before that was a breadbasket, and we do that on a large scale. Now, in Iraq, you can see it because the soil isn't there anymore. But in a sea that is similar, when ecosystem becomes barren, the structure at the bottom is gone because of trawling that laminates everything in the bottom, and because the animals that make up marine ecosystem, the way the trees make up a forest, they are gone. So there's only water and polluted water at that, because without a functioning ecosystem, you have a proliferation of harmful algal blooms. Yeah.
So that didn't really work out for the Akkadian people or the Sumerians that were farming that region.
Well, we last visited them. They were doing okay the last time that we came by Earth, but it seems like they're not really around anymore.
Have you seen Nineveh lately?
Yeah, the Akkadian with K's are gone, and so are the Akkadian with AC from New France. And basically, it was cod in this case that was at the background for the fight between the French and the English. It is very much a cod story, the story of the beginning of Canada.
Wait, tell us more about this cod story at the center of history.
Well, basically, Europeans exploited the discovery of Canada, their discovery of Canada, by seasonally sending seasonally every fishing season in the summer a crew of fishers from Europe, and that was British, French, Portuguese, and so on. They came and grabbed all the cod they could, dried it, and brought it back to Europe in different form. Bacalao is one well-known form where it was dried. It was wind dried and became like wood. And this, you could keep this going. I've lived in the Philippines, for example, and the very rich in the Philippines, they eat bacalao, which come from Spain, which came from New England and Canada. So that has been going on for hundreds of years, and it was a fishery that was sustainable, and it was very hard work, because the people that fished that on very small vessel, on small boats, with rowing, and they had lines and stuff, and they brought their catch into the bigger boats, and then they were brought on land to dry and so on. It was a big business in a time, but it was driven. It was not driven by fossil energy. It was driven by the wind, because sailing and so on, and by muscle power. So there was a limit to what you could do. And the important thing is that there was a limit to the depth at which you could operate. So you would extract cod only down to about 50 meters. So the majority of cod, though, they were in deeper water. So you had like a treasure in a bank, and what came out is only the interest from that bank, or only the cod that wanted to be caught committed suicide by going into shallow water. I'm using all kind of analogies, obviously not
depressed fish everywhere.
But they could fish. Europeans could fish only the fish down to about 50 meters, and later when when a local fishery developed. I'm not talking about that of First Nation. A local European fishery developed because settlers had settled in Newfoundland. They used traps, and these traps reach also to 30, 40 meters, the biggest ones. And that maintained the fishery until the late 50s, the early 60s. But in the early 60s, giant trawlers came from Europe. And these giant trawlers don't have the depth limit. In fact, I remember we, on this German vessel, we could fish at 1 kilometer depth, and we did. And the trawl net came back, and it was full of cod, obviously, but also deep sea fish, so-called redfish, and all kind of black little fish that lived in very deep water, and rocks, boulders, like these glacial rocks that are all rounded, and they were the size of a little Volkswagen, and all of this was thrown on board, and it was tons and tons of stuff. And because we were on a research vessel, it was a commercial vessel converted to a research vessel. We would pick out maybe 100 cod, measure them, and throw out everything. It was a gigantic waste, but we could fish at 1 kilometer depth, even more. And so it's like you open the treasure chest of a bank. You can empty the treasure there, so you don't fish the interest. You don't get the interest from the capital. You get the capital, and that works out very fine for a few years. But then the treasure is empty, and there you are. So there you are with no more cod.
Sorry, do you imagine some sort of a national reserve type system?
Well, obviously, the proper fishery management involves leaving lots of fish in the water, because this is a fish in the water that produces the fish that you catch. And so you must have a high biomass of fish. It's called biomass, a high number of big fish in the water. So they produce the eggs that produce the young, that produce the fish that you can catch. And so you can maintain the big population. If you maintain a big population, you can also paradoxically get a big catch. If you rapidly fish down what you have, you will succeed in maintaining big catch until the end. So it's like you have an inheritance, and you can forever get an interest, 5% or 10%, or you decide to live large and then you get into the capital. And so that's an option of fisheries management that exists when it's well done, can be very profitable, and you can have very profitable fisheries. And an example of that is the US that have a very good management system. In Canada, we don't. In Canada, we have a system that is at the mercy of the whims of the minister. And so the minister can decide to let any fishery, the Minister of Fishery, be opened up, and the level of catches can be set by the ministerial fiat. In the US, the level of catches is determined by a rule. The rule is that the biomass in the sea must be above a certain level, and you can catch that what is in excess of that level. So in the US, they have a system where you have a law that is applied. Here in Canada, we have a system where the Minister of Justice can intervene in a trial.
Wow, that's maybe the first nice thing anyone said about the US all winter.
Yeah, we haven't heard a lot of that.
They mind you, if Trump had been reelected, that would be the thing that he would have abolished, because he was his Secretary of Commerce had begun the demolition of the management system, but they did not succeed, and they were not fast enough. But they would have demolished that system, and so they didn't succeed, and it won't happen now.
How do they determine those levels? How do the scientists establish those heuristics?
Well, I think they go and they talk to the fish, right?
In a sense, yes. One method of determining, actually, it's not as silly as it sounds. One method to get the amount of fish that is in the sea is to send sound waves in the sea to scream at them, and then you measure how much comes back. And depending on calibration that you have done before, the strength of the signal that is sent back is telling you there is fish in this area. As this is called echo sounding or hydroacoustics. You can get this demonstration from any fisher. They have echo sounder or hydroacoustics echolocators, where you can see the surface of the sea, the bottom of the sea, and this is like a screen that rolls, and you can see the dark spots of the fish. If this is a simple echo sounder, this will be group of fish, but if it's very precise, you can get single fish, and you can determine how big they are, and certain fish can be better identified than others. For example, if they have a gas bladder, there is a strong contrast between the water and the gas, and the signal you get is very clear. So just like whales can identify identify potential prey with sounds, and dolphins can do that, humans can do that as well. This is one method. Another method is tagging. You catch a few fish, you tag them, you put a tag on their back, and then you throw them back. They will mix with the fish that are there. And when you catch a few more, the dilution of the fish that you have tagged into the fish that are in the water will tell you how many they are. Imagine you tag 100 fish, and then you catch them again, and you get 1 in 10 of your fish that you catch have a tag. that means the population is 10 times bigger, right? And so on. So you can tag fish and you can find how big they are. Another way of a third method I will give you is, if the fish get old, you can actually track, if you catch them, if you catch a few, there will be fewer fish that are 11-year-old compared with 10-year-old, with 9-year-old, and so on.
How can you
So
tell that?
if you pardon?
How can you tell 9 versus 10 versus 11?
Or the age of fish can be determined by looking at the bone. You can look at almost every bone that they have, but in cod, for example, you look at the bone that they have in the inner ear. It's a bone that allows them to tell whether they have to balance themselves. And this bone can be cut, and you will see rings like trees. So if you cut a tree, you will see a ring, winter ring and summer rings, right? You can count them, and you know how old the tree is. You can fish also have annual rings in their bones, and so you can know when you catch a fish, you can know how old it is. And so if you catch a bunch of fish, you will have usually more that are old than that are new, and that are young, because young fish come and they die gradually. So you can, from the catch composition, you can infer the mortality rate, the mortality rate. And if you have the amount that you catch and the mortality rate, you can infer how big the population is. So it involves a practical component. You have to sample the fish, you have to age them, and then it involves a mathematical component. And lots of fisheries science is actually applied math.
So you're making a lot of predictions about what will happen.
Well, my question is, the ocean is really big, and you're making these predictions about what will happen or what can happen. How do you know that the fish aren't just getting away from you? If you humans are fishing so close to one place, can't they just go somewhere else?
The fish don't go everywhere. It's like the Wilder Basin is Serengeti. They stay in Tanzania. They don't go to Somalia or all the way to Congo and stuff. So a population inhabits a certain area.
Well, sort of, but humans don't. Humans don't, right? If you look at the human history.
Well, the fish have immigration policies, clearly, or something.
You think they have, like, fish visas?
Fish have constraints as to the temperature that they can tolerate, the depth that they can tolerate. They have constraints. The humans are the only being on Earth that has abolished all constraints on its own distribution, and this is what has made us an invasive species, the most deadly invasive species on Earth. The fact that we are not limited. Look at humans, like say 1 million years ago, where we were not really humans then. We needed certain things to live. And so our distribution at the time was subtropical zone and tropical zone. 400 years later, humans had learned to accommodate colder climate. And so Neanderthal and other human-like beings emerged that could tolerate colder climate. And modern humans learn to sew. Neanderthal don't have needles in in their repertoire. And sewing made it possible to make clothes that would really protect you from the cold. And it became possible to invade even areas like Siberia and in North Asia and North America. And so the emergence of the various Inuit cultures is connected with not only new method of hunting and so on, but the ability to sew. And so each of the invention that we made enable us to live in another habitat. But animals don't make invention; they evolve and evolve to get into new habitat, and that's a process that is much slower.
Is it possible that animals do invent things, but humans haven't noticed it yet? I'm always curious about this.
For example, spiders. I'm an arachnophobe, so it's very difficult for me to talk about it. Have invented, in the course of their evolution, material such as silk, spider silk, more resistance on a per cross-sectional basis than steel. So.
But they don't build bridges with it for some reason. For some reason, humans...
They do build bridges, but they don't build bridges the size we do.
There's no public infrastructure in the spider world.
Yes, but there is public infrastructure in the termite world. And termites have invented the way to air conditioning much earlier than us. In other words, if we look at the animal world, we will find lots of invention that we have problems replicating. For example, another one is ants cultivate fungus, the fungi that they eat, and they manage to keep bacteria from eating the cultures. And we also always have problem with parasites, but apparently the ants have way to protect their farming system from bacteria. We don't. So there is a lot to learn from animal technology, and in fact, lots of scientists do that, learn animal technology. But overall, our technology is better than that of all animals, except that this technology might be our demise. And so I don't know if it is really better, but we will go along with the idea of better technology.
Well, this is what's so interesting, right? Because humans have this ability to fish. And you're saying that the early Europeans came to North America and they fished in a way that you said was sustainable. And then there was the invention of this new technology, the trawler, which was not sustainable. Did anybody talk about that at the moment? Or did it seem like trawling was totally going to be okay?
Trawling was invented in the age of sail in 1400 something in England. And it was always controversial. People always knew that it is a problem. And there were always objections. But it opposed small-scale fishes with large-scale fishes that had the means of acquiring bigger boats. And with this, when you have such means, you have also political access. And so, the people who deployed trawlers always have more political power than the ones who don't. And the issue of trawling versus not trawling is simply an issue of power, of political power, economic power. And it's similar to lots of stuff that we have, problem that we have. We cannot, the transition of fisheries away from trawling is essentially a political issue, like healthcare, like education, like lots of other issue, the environment, the protection of forests, the protection of soils, and these are always political issue, because if somebody is can make a quick buck out of environmental destructive technology, they will do it as long as they can, and they have to be stopped. The only debates that are purely scientific nowadays are debate about cosmology, and because we cannot influence black holes and so on, and even those debates are biased by ideas that people have in the back of their head about creation and theology. But the scientific debate, for example, about the Hubble constant, how fast the universe expands, are purely scientific debates. People argue about with evidence and so on. But every debates about trolling, debate about healthcare and stuff, are debate about scientific issues combined with economic interest, and that is the most toxic mix that you can have.
How do you define science, Dr. Pauly?
I think it's something like the systematic study of the world around us, something like that. And so I studied in Germany. My
very systematic place.
Very systematic. And in place. Germany, very what?
A very systematic place, Germany.
Yeah, that's not the point here. The point here is that the Germans don't make much of a difference between what they call Geisteswissenschaft, which is humanities and social sciences, and the natural sciences, Naturwissenschaft. The two concepts are not very similar. Very similar in that it is a systematic study where evidence has to be presented for or against what is being discussed, and this emphasis on evidence is the key point, and it is almost the same in fisheries or chemistry and stuff, and in history. If you study history and you make the claim that the Roman Empire collapsed because it had problem raising taxes and not because of barbarian invasion, you have to present evidence.
But
and
it's interesting.
This emphasis on evidence is a point.
So it seems like many different positions can point to the same evidence and come up with completely different interpretations of what's happening. And
I understand. The same evidence can lead to different conclusion. In that case, you must get more evidence. The more evidence is the only way to separate the wheat from the chaff.
And better quality evidence. It seems like you're very much concerned with the quality of the evidence, right?
Well, if you have a lot of weak evidence from different fields, this is almost the same as quality evidence from one field, because when you announce an explanation for something, that something should not only explain the fact that you have, but the fact it should explain related facts. For example, evolution doesn't only explain why plants work, but also animals, and it works only for bacteria. And it was produced at a time when genetics was not known, and not to mention genomics. But when this stuff came on board, it also worked. So, in other words, natural selection is an example of scientific theory that was successful, that explained the evidence that was available at the time that Darwin worked on it, but it also explained other things that were not available to him.
So it's generalizable.
It's general, and really the best science, and I mean both Geisteswissenschaft and Naturwissenschaft, the both social science, if you like, or humanities, is evidence that is a statement that applied to a large number of, to a large field, because if something applies only to a small thing, it is only a description of that small thing. An explanation applies to a broad field, and then the description must be smaller than the thing that is to be described and to be explained. If your explanation is too big relative to what is to be explained, it's not an explanation, it's a description.
So on our planet, we think of explanations as mechanism. So there has to be a very ordered sequence of cause and effect, whereas a description, something like, like you guys have, say, Newton's laws of gravity, which describe how the planets move, but they don't really explain how the planets move, right?
Exactly. An explanation is something that maps a phenomenon onto something else that is established. So, because what you don't want to regress ad infinitum. You don't want to have one turtle on top of the turtle on top of another turtle and so on. You want the thing that is supposed to be explained is supposed to be resting on things that don't need to be explained. And so this mapping, I call it mapping. This mapping is essential. That's an explanation, and lots of explanation, of so-called explanation, that you find in marine biology in my field are really description and restatement of the problem. I remember as a student, I encountered a book. I had a textbook in German that was explaining why plants kind of sleep during the night.
Mm-hmm.
They do fewer things and they sleep because of the release of a substance that is called dormin. That's from the French word dormir, to sleep. And this was a wonderful example of a stupid non-explanation.
It physicalizes it, though, which is probably what the Western scientists were interested in at the time.
Yeah, it provides a pseudo explanation that has a technical touch. So yeah.
So my question, what's really interesting is that on Earth, it seems like these special interest groups, you talked about the economic and political powers, are able to sort of weaponize these explanations to their own ends.
And these non-explanations, too.
And non-explanations, descriptions, pseudo-explanations. I'm curious what the future of protecting the actual objective evaluation of your natural world looks like. What are the ways you can imagine of protecting against those sort of tragedies of the commons and profiteering, and what's the future look like?
The jury is still out. The jury is still out whether we will make it or not. I just read a nice book that could be described as science fiction, but it's really is not. It's called The Ministry of the Future. This is it's a story that starts 3 years from now about the Paris Accord producing a little agency that is supposed to anticipate how the world, or work toward a world where we don't have global warming, where we have less carbon dioxide emission, and marvelous woman is hired from Ireland that leads this agency, which is then renamed, has a nickname, like the World Bank has a nickname and so on, the Ministry of the Future. And she manages to convince central bankers of major countries, including China, to produce a currency that is linked to carbon sequestration. And but she managed to do that only because India suffers a heat wave that kills 20 million Indians. And so that's very realistic because heat waves are coming. Heat waves have already occurred. One of the first was in France. It killed 20,000 people. And so this book outlines how the world could change toward a world where we don't have global warming. But the price you have to pay is that she had to tolerate in her agency a black op operation that her deputy run that was using drone to bring down airplanes.
Wow. And
jet planes, especially jet planes of billionaires flying around the island. Wow. And so you can actually change the world, but it is doubtful. In that book, you see that we will do it harmoniously, that we will do it because we have the better argument. It will depend a lot on accident, on contingency, and therefore it's unpredictable. Basically, I believe that any prediction will be wrong because it depends on too many things that cannot be evaluated. Imagine Trump could have actually won his election if he had not been so stupid with regard to COVID. If he had won the election, Paris Agreement would be definitely shot because he would ignore it for 4 more years and stuff. The Paris Agreement can be revived. Maybe it will spawn a Ministry of the Future. Maybe it will spawn activities. But this possibility, and it is only a possibility, is only possible because that stupid ass Trump has been repudiated by a slim majority, if you like. That is not predictable. This was not predictable, and this was not predicted and not predictable, and so the world the future consists of so many things that people who say this will happen are almost certainly wrong, and therefore we can only hope. And if you want to know the motto that I live by is not at all this will work and therefore I will do it, but I live by what could happen is so horrible that we must fight against it, irrespective of the chance of the possibility of winning or losing. This is very similar to Churchill in 1940, who said, we will fight the Germans on the beach, we'll fight them everywhere, in the hills, everywhere, all the time. But he didn't know that the Allies would win. He didn't know that the US would shift to helping Britain. It was completely open at the time. It didn't know that Japan would attack the US and the German declared war on the US, which is insane, and the US would come. He didn't know all these things. He didn't know even that Germany would attack the Soviet Union, which is completely insane. But at the time when they had not beaten Britain, and he didn't know any of these things, but he promised to fight. And that's what we can do. This is the only thing that we know, what we're going to do. And so I admire Greta and the other people who fight against climate change. And in my part of the world, I do fight, if I can qualify that, of fighting against overfishing. But I have no idea about whether we would win or not. No idea.
It's really interesting to me that in this novel that you just described, there is this really cool idea of incentivizing, let's say, ecological decisions or ethical ecological decisions on a personal level. But what's really interesting is that this single metric of carbon dioxide is singled out, which seems like it leaves the door open to, fishery damage and toxic waste and, let's say, all sorts of other environmental catastrophes that could be going on under the surface. Why do you think that humans are so fixated on this single metric, carbon dioxide?
I think we are fixating on carbon dioxide because it's the most important metric. That's one. I think this is the most important one. Methane might be also important in the future, but right now,
hold on. Is it possible that the carbon dioxide, let's say that humans stopped producing all pollutants and kept producing carbon dioxide at the rate that they're producing today? Is it possible that ecosystems would be able to recover sufficiently to mitigate the additional carbon dioxide? Or alternatively,
I don't think so.
If you get rid of all the carbon dioxide, let's say magically in the next century, you get rid of all the carbon dioxide, but you still have the polluting industry. You still have all of the other inputs. Do you think that ecosystems would recover? Pesticides, yeah.
I hear you, but the effort to turn around energy production, which is centered around the burning of fossil fuel and carbon dioxide emission, this effort will be so big, and the electrification of our energy system should have as a byproduct that certain things will be also sorted out. But I must admit that in that book, for example, the ocean are not mentioned, and it is assumed it is either because the author didn't want to open a can of worms, or because he thought that the ocean would pay the price. Because anyway,
that's exactly what I'm talking. That's exactly it. It seems like there's a lot of, if you focus only on one metric, and we know that the carbon dioxide on Earth has gone through the roof in the past without the humans around, and it'll probably go through the roof again, and it'll sink back down, and the ferns will sop it up.
No, that's not the way to look at it. That's not the way to look at it, because that metric is directly connected with temperature, and the temperature is directly connected with survival of lots of species.
But the temperature has been varying a lot, right, throughout the history of the planet.
Yeah, and so has the biodiversity of the planet. And if you increase the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you can get a mass extinction. And that's what we're getting. This is what we are getting into. So this metric is not measuring something else. You call it a metric. I think it's wrong. It's not a measure of something else. It is itself bad. We use GDP. We use it to measure well-being, wealth, and so on. And it is a bad metric. This is because it is a bad metric because it doesn't describe what the real thing that happens, which is how the majority of population partakes in the economy. But carbon dioxide is not a metric. It's not a measure of something else. It is itself bad. And so I don't agree that doing that metric, reducing carbon dioxide alone, wouldn't be the thing to do. It is the thing to do because the political power of the fossil industry is so immense that if it were broken, the issues of fisheries would be easily settled. Basically, you can break this issue of carbon dioxide emission by polluting industry. You only through a political change that is massive and would involve lots of people, the majority of population on Earth. And if we succeed in that, the other stuff is easy to solve.
So,
but we, because it's not a metric.
So what you're saying is that carbon dioxide needs to be mitigated because it is a readout for energy systems that burn things to provide.
Fossil fuel, yes.
Or biochar, or whatever it is that people choose to burn. But basically, humans have been combusting things for a really, really, really long time. And if humans can figure out how to power their civilization without burning things, then a lot of problems get solved. Because there's a lot less of a burden on the planet.
I should add that I was getting worried as I read the book that population never got mentioned. And then it got mentioned near the end. Because the democratic, with small d, change that would be necessary to shift over to a decentralized electricity-based world civilization, these democratic changes would change also the population, the standing of women in all cultures, and that change status should be that every woman can control how many children she wants to have, independently of her husband or whatever man. That is a crucial element of our survival. That woman can make a decision of every children they want to have. But by the way, I'm the first of eight children. My mother didn't want any of us.
Aww.
She loved us all, but she didn't want any of us. She was a victim of a policy, a natalist policy that France had that prevented women from being able to regulate the number of children they had. And it is assumed, this is probably not correct, that democratization would lead to reduction of the number of children that people have. It probably is true, but I would at all mind if public service announcements were done, especially in rich countries, to have fewer children. I think the economists that tell us that we need to have a pyramid of young people to help to maintain economic growth are completely insane, because this pyramid is what is causing us to move toward 10 billion people and beyond, which is completely insane.
Well, hold on. Before we go to the insanity of demographics on Earth, I want to finish with this question of carbon dioxide. So we settled that there is a good reason to point to carbon dioxide as a necessary metric to deal with, or a necessary...
As like an output marker for industrial control, let's say, over the general operation.
It's not a marker. It is the thing. It is not a marker.
Well, it's one of the things, right? I mean, we have pesticides, we have nuclear.
Hold on. It's different. Because carbon dioxide is from burning, from fossil fuels, right? So, like construction, the construction industry is like 20% of emissions on Earth, right? So anytime you build a building, you have to make cement, and making concrete is really energetically expensive. Okay.
I understand it's threatening and on its own level, but it's also a marker.
Hold on. Let me make this presentation. It is being used as a marker for doing other stuff. So we interviewed someone who studies solar geoengineering. Do you know what this is, Dr. Pauly?
Yes, sure, I do.
Yeah, exactly. Your reaction says everything. So what is happening is that carbon dioxide is being used to justify this sort of technological development that humans can't possibly know the outcome to.
Well, the solar geoengineering, people who, if that's what you mean, or propose to prevent sun rays to reach the Earth by releasing particles. This is also dealt with in the book. I think it is crazy.
Did you write this book?
Because, pardon?
I said, did you write this book?
Did I write it?
Yeah, is this your book?
No, I didn't write it.
Okay.
But I was really impressed by it. It is crazy because all it would do, it would prevent warming, but it would not prevent carbon dioxide to pile up, and it would it would continue the acidification process, and basically it would remove the incentive to actually generate less carbon. And our civilization would then be at the mercy of the continued insulation of this provided by these particles that we would produce, and that is a sure thing to ensure a quick catastrophe a few decades down the line. I think this scheme which would sacrifice the world ocean, that is one thing, but are completely insane, and they are a result of consideration like how can we prevent the changes from affecting the fossil fuel industry. And basically the fossil fuel industry and the industries that generate lots of carbon dioxide, like the construction industry, they have to change. And if they don't change, trying to prevent sun rays from reaching the Earth so they can continue to emit is completely insane. But the people are so twisted by the belief that things have to continue to be done the way they were done before. That is a real problem. And if our civilization commits suicide, that is going to be it. That's going to be that way.
So let's say that you humans figure out how to completely abridge your carbon output. Will that fix the oceans?
If we continue to fish the same way, certainly not. If we continue to use them for dumping plastics, certainly not. It is a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition. And basically, all of this, that what we're talking about, are all necessary conditions. They are not sufficient conditions.
I love that.
The sufficient condition are the finishing touch. For example, if we lick that problem of carbon dioxide, we will have some people would propose that we go for nuclear energy, and there is various opinion about that, and then we will have to deal with that also. But without fixing the main problem, we cannot fix any other problem. And if this global warming continues, the big issue is that you can maintain the inequality of access to resources only through balance. That is, we have problem with water, we have problem with food. We will have problem with food, and because harvest depend on the monsoon in South Asia, and the monsoon will go down the drain one of these years, and there are billions of people that will be affected, and that is the time at which the option of going fascist open itself for the big rich countries. The US is a case in point. It is at the edge of turning into a fascist country. And I've lived a long time in Germany. I know what I'm talking about. And the people who are affected mostly by this global warming thing are people of color. And they will have to be accommodated as Bangladesh, for example, is flooded, and they will have to find homes, and the rich country will not want to provide them homes. So we're talking about the possibility of mass genocide or mass killings or wars, and this is is the problem that comes with global warming, the possibility of wars, and what we had in Syria. I don't know if you have followed that up, but the
Mesopotamia
Syria,
comes up again.
Pardon?
Mesopotamia is not looking so good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is no purpose. Mesopotamia. The whole mess in Syria started with a drought. Syria had a drought, and 3-4 million farmers went into the cities, and they didn't find in the cities the welcome in their own city, mind you, in the welcome and the social services that they were expecting. And at the same time, there was the Arab Spring, and people hoped for these resources to be liberated by having a more democratic regime. And they asked for the more democratic regime, and what they got is an army that killed them. And then, one half of the population went into fighting, and the other half left the country. And they fled through Turkey into Europe, and they almost caused the European Union to break apart over the issue of a few million Syrians, 1 million Syrians. They almost called it, because Germany accepted them, some other countries did not. Semi-fascist regime like we have now in Hungary. And the law in the European Union is that refugees should be distributed evenly. And Germany did accept a huge number of refugees, and a Nazi party re-emerged because of that in Germany. A fascist kind of group. That is likely to be the case. Trump was fighting, the main thing with Trump was immigrant control, immigrant mistreatment. That was the thing. People of color in general, but immigrants specifically. What do you think will happen when we have millions and millions and millions of people coming because of drought, coming because of climate change in general, of their country being flooded?
Well, so this is the question that I have. This is the question that I have. The version of the world where there are millions of migrants that need to be accepted into other countries is very much a real event. And the fact that they're not being accepted into these countries very smoothly is also a very real event. Humans are really struggling with this right now. But on a long enough time scale, climate change is inevitable, right? Like, let's say there's no carbon dioxide. Let's say carbon dioxide is mitigated. The climate will still change. You don't solve this problem by getting rid of carbon dioxide.
It's changed on every planet we've looked at so far.
I mean, Antarctica has had ginkgo and palms growing on it, right?
You're dealing here with a guy who would read science fiction, and our civilization emerged about 10,000 years ago in the Middle East. That was cooler than now. And it emerged in a period of history of the evolution of the Earth that was specific, and it was not too hot, not too warm, Goldilocks kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We have the possibility, forget about climate change now, the emission like crazy. We could stabilize the climate at the level we want and at the level we need. So I don't know what you have encountered on other planets, but we could stabilize the climate at the level that we want. So I don't buy that the climate would change anyway, because we could, again, technically, we could prevent further change.
How?
Do you think that carbon dioxide is the only factor that leads to climate change?
Wait, I want to know how you're going to prevent change. These are two questions.
Well, certainly we can. Imagine if we can draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We can decide to what level we draw it down, and that would set the average temperature. We can also modify the albedo of the Earth in general by having ice or not having ice, or we can change the color of the ice. We can put soot all over Antarctica if we wanted, and get it to melt in no time. So we can actually, technologically, we could stabilize the climate for the next 10,000 years, no problem.
That's very ambitious.
Then
what if the Earth gets closer to the sun, though?
What about the axial precession?
In 10,000 years, we could also prevent that from happening. There is a very nice Chinese science fiction. It's called The Wandering Earth, because the sun is going to explode, and people built huge motors that push the Earth out of its present orbit.
We did that once.
Our species had to do that one time.
Look, we don't need to go so deep in science fiction. The point is that there is no reason to assume that we could not get out of this. Technologically speaking, we can get out of this bind we are in on short term. In the longer term, we will colonize other planets, we will terraform them, and we will expand if we make it past this problem that we have now. And that's not sure. It's not sure that we will make it, because 10 billion people that hate each other, that could be a big problem. And the hatred, the inability to cooperate, the emergence of leaders that see everything in as a zero-sum game, that can bring huge trouble. But it is not necessarily so.
It seems like that hatred is very profitable, and looking at things as a zero-sum game allows certain power groups to sort of dominate others.
Yes, but they don't always win. Trump is out tomorrow.
Big risk.
So we cannot predict. I was convinced that he would win, and He didn't. So we don't know, and therefore we have to fight for what is right, for what we think is right, and let the ship come down.
I really appreciate your optimism.
And
I'm not optimistic. I'm not optimistic.
Well, it seems like you believe in fighting. That's more optimistic than, let's say.
That's right. That's right. I'm militant, not so much optimistic. I frankly, I think that these categories, optimistic, pessimistic, don't mean anything. If I go back to the Churchill analogy, the issue was not, are you optimistic or pessimistic with regard to the survival of British Isles against a German onslaught? No. The question was, are we going to fight or not? That was the issue. And I think that is the only way you can tackle this problem. The optimistic versus pessimistic question is, well, in your case, since you come from another planet, you can afford to do that. You can afford to look at the Earth and say, well, it might work, it might not work. But we cannot. We cannot, because we are in it. So the issue for us is not whether we're going to make it or not. The issue is what we're going to do.
Well, so the question is, do you fight for keeping things as they are, or do you fight for being resilient to change?
Being resilient to change doesn't mean anything to me. There are things that are happening that I don't like, and I fight against them. I don't know what being resilient to change means, and I suspect that it means nothing.
I think that what it means is, like, you're saying that there's all of this nationalism. You're saying that there's all of this hatred and violence on Earth. And that, to me, seems like it comes from not wanting things to change.
Well, you don't want things to change into a fascist regime, probably.
Well, I think that people are violent because they want their regimes to be maintained, right? I mean, this whole thing with nationalism emerging and European nationalism and the migrant crisis, people in Europe wanted Europe to stay a certain way.
People are afraid to change. Sometimes people indeed are afraid to change and are afraid to change it. But sometimes people can handle change if they can see the point. And the point is to make that visible, because some things cannot go on. And again, I lived a long time in Germany, and I came to that country in '63, and I met lots of people whose life had been shaped by Nazism, by the 12 years that Hitler was in power. And some of them were still dreaming of him. They were still Nazi at heart. And many of them, most of them had understood that it was wrong. And basically we have to do that. We have to fight the good fight, and that's pro bono contra malum. You have to pick out things that are good and then work against the things that are no good. This is almost trivial. This is at the base of the morality of every culture. In a culture, you should not lie, you should not steal things, and you should not kill your neighbor. And there is not one culture that says that you should do that. So basically, we have to draw on the roots of culture, which is what enables us to live together, and you get out of the zero-sum game.
It's interesting that the Department of Defense doesn't seem to live up to that culture, or let's say the criminal justice system, or it seems like there's times the IRS likes to steal, criminal justice system likes to kill people.
Yeah, but they do that, but we assess them by the criteria that I mentioned. In other words, when the criminal justice system does what it does, too many First Nation are killed by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We use that criterion that I mentioned to criticize them, and we don't say they do whatever they want, and we let them. Similarly, armies in the West, at least, are held to certain standard. Since the creation of the Red Cross, armies are not supposed to kill their prisoners. And in the US, for example, against Trump was criticized for pardoning killers that American soldiers that had killed civilians in Iraq. Now that implies that at least in the US Army, there are mechanisms to punish soldiers that are killing civilians. That was totally inconceivable 2 centuries ago.
Yeah.
Totally inconceivable, because so you do not say there is no progress. Martin Luther King, we had Martin Luther King yesterday. The arc of justice bends, the arc of history bends toward justice. That we can see that the circle of empathy that sometimes is evoked, it broadens and includes more and more people of different belief and collaboration. 100 years ago, I could not, with my skin color, have taught at UBC. And in fact, I would not. The circle of empathy includes even characters like you now, right?
It constantly expands.
But my fur is so nice.
It does look very good. But I don't know. I mean, humans are they're very resistant to change, and none of these things have happened easily or quietly. People have pushed for change.
Yep. Nobody says that that it is easy, but specifically, I'm French, but my father was African American, and 250 years ago, a while ago, my ancestors were slaves in U.S. plantation. And anybody who says that there is no social progress, I think it's not very nice, because it says that there is no difference between my situation as professor at UBC and that of my ancestors in the deep south of the United States is the same. There's been no change. Well, that's stupid, obviously. And you, the brown one, you are a female of whatever species you belong to. Females, humans, didn't have the right to be. My mother got the right to have a bank account, only in the 60s, or 70s. In France, and that is also the arc. Yeah, that's true. The progress takes a long time, if any progress. But I think there is something like progress.
Even ecologically?
Because ecologically, no. We are biodiversity on Earth is in great danger, and I will mention that book again because it is structured around half the Earth. This is a book by E.O. Wilson that proposed that we should rewild half the Earth. We should give half the Earth to the animals and plants, and I think this is a marvelous idea. And the book explained how rewilding half of the US would actually enhance agriculture, enhance everything actually. It makes a good case that rewilding is a good idea. And I think so too. I think so that working ecosystems, plants and stuff, without us in it would be having lots of this ecosystem would be a good thing. So halve the earth, because if we don't move out of the world of um, of forests and plains and stuff and floodplains, and if we don't move out of them, we destroy them.
Yeah, the real question is going to be whose half of the earth gets moved out of.
Well, maybe you can move out of the hot part.
It should be fractal. It should be in all ecosystem half, because obviously if all Indians have to go so the India can be rewilded, that's not right and not fair. It has to be fractal, and we have a similar problem when we try to create national parks or marine protected areas. They must not be out there in the middle of the ocean. They must be everywhere. It's going to be fractal as well, or it's not going to work.
You know, what's really interesting to me is you made a really good case for there really is all this amazing progress on Earth. The humans the idea of human rights is a relatively modern conception.
Yeah.
But what's really scary, if you look at history going all the way back to Mesopotamia and the droughts and the climate change, is that these ecological issues actually, like you say, can lead to wars. And very quickly, without let's say a government or these sort of international cooperation, you lose human rights, right? Those are some of the first things that are going to disappear. And so all of this progress, in some sense, is very much hinging upon the health of your local environment, your ecology.
And the continuation of the civilization, right? Because if civilization
and your democracy. Because if you look at the Nazi, they were negating 2,000 years of societal progress, because they abolished all that we knew about how we live together. And but again, they were beaten, and immediate after World War II, there was an outburst of democratization that was global, and the working class in many countries was drawn into 30 years of economic progress. The middle class in the US was produced. In Germany, they had a so-called Wirtschaftswunder, an economic miracle. In France, it was called les 30 Glorieuses, the glorious 30 years, because misery was extirpated out of France in the 30 years after the World War. And the colonial empires, which were unjust and violent and racist, the colonial empire of France and Britain and Portugal, they broke down in the 60s, especially in the 60s. So you can tell the World War II, the beating of that beast that fascism was, led to a democratization, a wave of democratization that and progress, and the creation of the United Nations, Declaration of Human Rights, and so on. And you cannot tell, I cannot tell the age in your species, but maybe you're too young to have experienced the regression that started in the 80s with the election of Reagan in the US and Thatcher in the UK. That all these achievements were intellectually and in practice turned back. And from the early 80s on, the relative standing of the working class as a whole, and the rich people became worse and worse and worse, starting in the early 80s. And so from the early 80s on, all benefit from increased productivity went to the very rich, and that is one reason why we have this drift to the right now, because we don't the workers, the poor people, actually don't get the benefit of the increased productivity of the society in which we live.
Why do you think that pushes people to the right, though? Because isn't the left?
Because it is conceptually difficult to conceive your economy as one that is designed to rob you, and it's easier to conceive the fault for your problem of being in other people. Basically, I would say that's going to sound stupid, but they would say we are too dumb to understand what is being done to us, and most people, and we are being screwed by our economic system, but we don't see it. All we do is react to hot button issues that are presented to us. This is the immigrants. This is the people of color. This is the Jews. This is this and that, and we have whole habits of reacting to these things. India has Hindu nationalism. Can you imagine such crap?
So you're basically saying that people aren't voting in their own interests; they're just voting emotionally.
Very much against their own interest, and it began in the 80s because people forgot what the war meant, what fascism is, and where it came from. They had learned it, but they unlearned it.
Hold on. I think that in the 80s, there was also this emergence of the idea of this Malthusian dynamics. Do you know that book, that Limits to Growth?
Yeah, sure, I know, and I know lots of people who have participated in it and stuff. The Club of Rome, and basically this was intellectual scientists who did that, and they had zero effect on the population as a whole. Basically, the 80s was the beginning of a rightward drift, in which Thatcher, for example, the Prime Minister in England, said there is no such thing as society. There is only private interest that is that manifests itself. The fetishization of the market as solving everything. The Milton Friedman, the Chicago School of Economics, all of this manifestation was the pushing back the role of the state as a distributing mechanism. That happened throughout the West.
But don't you think this has to do with this ecological awareness too? Where there was all of the sudden this idea that came back that there were limits to the planet and there are too many people. And the fact that there are too many, you don't think that has anything to do with it?
These are all intellectual epiphenomena. Obviously, these things are true, what you're saying. There was an understanding, a deeper understanding of ecology and so on. In fact, the 70s were bigger in terms of understanding ecology, in the US at least, than now. There was the EPA was created, and the Clean Air Act. Even Nixon signed lots of laws that were actually fantastic. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, they were effective legislation that changed things. But all of this disappeared in the 80s, and basically
as a response, right? So you have all of these government regulations. You have the EPA, you have the Clean Air Act, you have all of these things that are like, hey, We have to take care of the planet. And what happens in the decades following is you have a massive political push by corporations to make sure that sort of thinking never, ever, ever manages to get a foothold
this
again.
cooperation came through because the citizenry as a whole voted for the right.
But why?
For the right politically.
But why?
That is my point. They basically the voting for the right is because they had forgotten what the right is. What the right is, the right is what.
Is it possible they were just horrified by the performance of the left as well? Like they were alienated by certain leftist policies as well?
I wouldn't know which ones. It is possible. I don't want to be a pundit or so, but the 80s were a big transformation in our society in the West, and it shifted to the left, to the right, and it shifted to the right. The state withdrew from lots of things that it can do, and it left it to the corporation, and that's the mess we're in now. Mm-hmm. And it has to be regained. We have to re-establish the legitimacy of government as an agent of change, as a positive agent of change, and because governments are nothing but the expression of our collective will to live together, and government.
And they express the corporate will to make money, right? Too.
No,
I mean,
that is what they have succeeded in convincing us of.
That's the corruption.
That government is the place where the people who want to rob you, to steal stuff from you, to do you harm, are gathered. But I propose the alternative, that government is the only place where we can, as a collective of millions of people, we can put our agency to use, because we cannot change things by acting individually. If we want to have agency and change our health system or our industrial production system, we have to involve government, because it is an expression of what we want if we live in a democracy. But we must not elect then people who use the government to sell it to corporation. And we have been too many people have elect idiots because they don't care.
But no one can get elected if they don't have corporate sponsors. It costs too much money. It costs too much money.
It's not true. It's not true. But this demonization of government in Western democracies is one reason why we have bad government. What you are saying, the government is the place where all the corporation. Actually, it's not. It is the place where corporation will have a sway if we let them. Because we can elect people who will not be influenced like that. But we don't vote for them. Mm-hmm. Because why? Because we believe inherently that government cannot do it. So it doesn't.
I think that it plays out that people vote for who they're familiar with. And whoever has the most money makes themselves most familiar, and they get elected.
Yeah, but if this is simply like that, we have already lost. But fortunately, it is not like that. It is not like that.
So, do you have examples of places on Earth where things seem more functional than other places? Do you ever look at a country?
No, I can give you example, lots of them, of government changing things positively, and one of them is the government headed by Nelson Mandela that abolished apartheid. It cannot be right that government is representation of the corporation, because the corporation supported apartheid. They didn't want a franchise for all people in South Africa.
Well, we've talked about this a lot, right? Where it's the idea that the government is the entity that, in its ideal form, is able to push for change in a good direction. Right? Because without Mandela...
Government is us. The point is that we live in democracies, and the government that form are an expression of us.
Sure, but there's very powerful actors that have, let's say, corrupting motivations. They're self-interested, and they'll defect on the whole, and it appears that they're more powerful on Earth than the people.
Well, like, for example, take fisheries, right? Like, let's look at fisheries. Overfishing is bad for the fishery. But there are plenty of actors that would continue to overfish and fish it into the ground.
Yep. So, an example of...
And they have the political strings.
One second. In New Zealand, they have a system of fisheries where they privatized the fisheries, and they were run only for corporation, and 3 or 4 corporations run the fisheries. It was miserable. There was human rights abuse and so on. So they had an election over a range of issues, but fisheries was won. The Labour Party won. It is now headed by a relatively young woman who is wonderful. The fishery policy of the country is being modified, is being reformed. So it's being reformed to be different. Now, how successful they will be depends on how many people support the change, how many people don't, how many people don't care, how many people believe, like you seem to do, that government is always in the hand of corporation, therefore we don't.
Not always.
It will depend on all these things, but it has a real chance. I know that because I have a friend who is advising the government to modify the fishery policy. There is a good chance of getting rid of overfishing in that country. So we are blessed, if I can use a religious term, with having democracy in the West. Let's not behave as if we live in dictatorship. And the argument, governments are a tool of the right, a tool of corporation. It is saying, then what? What do? We become anarchists and we kill the ministers or something, or we think that Somalia is better, that had no government.
No, I think you have to come up with strategies for defending yourself against that sort of corruption, perhaps.
Yeah, basically we engage with government and we put in it our friends. They become. I have a previous my outreach person, the journalist that worked for us. He now is a liberal writer. He's a writer for Liberal MP. He's not a crook. He's not yet, at least. Not a crook.
We'll see.
Abandoning government to the right wing, to the corporation. It has been done. It is being done, but it is a strategy to kind of lose everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the same. I see this as sort of what we came to earlier, which is that mitigating carbon dioxide is the basis upon which a more stable environmental policy can be built. And here it's mitigating corporate influence in government so that people actually have the ability to pull on these levers. Because if you don't have the ability to pull on the lever because someone is holding it down, then right-wing nationalism is the only possible outcome.
Yep, exactly.
Well, that wraps everything up then.
Problem solved.
Dr. Pauly, we've taken so much of your time.
You have.
We really appreciate your ideas and discussion. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Just for information, is this being recorded and or that who listened?
We've been publishing them on Earth. I'm not sure when this episode will go up. It takes a while, as you can imagine, to get all of the transmissions to Earth. We're on our way towards your solar system, but it's going kind of slow.
Okay.
But yeah,
okay.
we'll
Do
keep you posted.
inform me when something becomes available, and my outreach person will be in touch. As they say in Hollywood, my people will talk to your people.